Every guitar player needs a combo amp, in my opinion. Especially if you're taking your amp to different places, to gigs, to your friend's house, taking it on tour. I mean, whatever it is that you are doing, having a combo amp that checks all the boxes and sounds for your specific setup is just 100% necessary. And it's also not a huge pain in the ass to lug around. I've been in the market for a combo amp for a long time, but I sort of struggled to find one that did everything I really wanted it to do. That's until the Quilter Labs Aviator Mach 3 fell into my lap. Since I've had this amp, I've used it for every gig, every rehearsal in LA, and even to practice and record in my apartment since we can get lower volumes with it. This amp has 6 different voicings ranging from a 1957 Tweed to a Plexi. It's got a 3-band active EQ, reverb, tremolo, up to 200 watts of tube-like power, and a ton more that I'm really excited to get into in this video. I will talk about everything that this amp offers, all of its special features, go over every single sound possible so you can really hear what it can do. I'll get into all the cool things you can do with this amp, and most importantly, help you decide to see if this is right for you. This is probably gonna be a super long and very detailed video, so I made time codes for you, so feel free to jump around. Also, if you like this video and you find it helpful in any way, make sure to like this video and subscribe to see more. Let's now get into the Aviator Mach 3 from Quilter Labs. Now I'm first going to go over everything that's featured on this amp, all of the knobs and buttons. But then later on I will just have sound examples with no talking, and they'll be a little longer as well. Let's first go over all of our primary controls, starting with our voice selector switch. This allows you to choose between 6 distinct voices on each channel. I'll go over each of these in just a second. Next, we have our gain knob. This obviously adjusts the distortion from clean to super high gain. Honestly, one of my favorite features and knobs on this. It can really give you some insane tone. Next, we have the limiter. This obviously mainly works when we're using distortion and high gain, and it will intervene to limit how far into overdrive the sound can go. So if the limiter is all the way off, we're gonna have our normal gain sound, and the further we push this up, the less overdriven sound we can get, and it sort of gets a little compressy as well. Now the next one is the distortion boost, and let me tell you why this is also one of my favorite knobs, because it lets you add in breakup before the EQ section. So with that being said, the EQ here will also shape the tone of the distortion. You can basically compare this to putting a overdrive pedal in front of the amp. And then of course we have our 3-band EQ, bass, mids, and treble. Moving on to our effects controls, we have reverb and tremolo. We'll hear this in more detail in a second. And then moving on to our volume controls. First we have channel out. Now it's marked with percentages from 0 all the way to 100%. Now that's relating to the power level selected by the speaker volume, and that's located in the master section over here. Now here is our speaker volume. If you were to use this thing as just the amp itself, the more you crank this, the louder it will get within the speaker that comes in the combo. Now sig out, which means signal out, controls the volumes of the headphones or the line out. So the great thing about this is that if you cannot be too loud in your apartment, you can turn the speaker volume all the way down. You will hear nothing coming out of the amp speaker itself, but when you adjust the signal out volume, you can either have headphones in so you can hear it very quietly, or you can go right into your interface and record and practice that way as well. Now what I do when I play this thing live, I have a line out going into front of house. I put this around 50% and then let the sound guy sort of control the mix through the PA speakers. And then now this combo amp sort of acts as my floor monitors. So if I'm having a hard time hearing myself in ears or just even front of house in the PA speakers at the venue, if I need a little bit more volume, I can boost the speaker volume without messing up the levels of the sound guy and the overall mix and the sound in the venue. Easily one of my favorite things about this amp. It's also why it acts as such a great gigging amp. All right, now jumping back to our voice selector switch, you can see we have 6 different types of amps. Now 1957 is basically the earliest US made Tweed amp. It had relatively low power and kind of minimal EQ. I think it maybe had just I think a treble control at most. These amps are known for having a very fat and honest sound with a lot of overdriven gain. So the 1957 Voice, it's based on the famous 12-inch combo with no mid scoop and a mild treble boost. That's kind of typical of how tweed amps were played. Moving on to the next one, 1961. This is the blonde era of Fender amps. It's also the beginning of the tone stack circuit, which basically reduced mid gain and then allowed bass and treble to be dialed back in. And then that results in that mid scoop, provides more chime and bass, all while reducing mid-range clutter. So that gives you a louder but cleaner tone. Next we have 1965. This is the black panel era of Fender. This sort of gives you a lighter and silkier tone that was even cleaner than the 1961 blonde era. So both the 1961 and 1965 will give you a ringing clean tone, but also some really clear overdrive tones. The next one, which isn't too hard to guess, Plexi. So we have a British Marshall Plexi amp here. So there's a lower mid boost that increases overdrive, and it basically provides the feeling of using a large speaker stack. So the Plexi Voice, it'll activate a lower mid boost that increases overdrive, and it sort of gives you that feeling of using a full stack that a lot of those British bands used back in the 60s. Now next we have Sweet. You can sort of compare this to a Dumble sound. It's a very honest sound. You really have to be on your game when you're using this kind of voicing. This type of amp is pretty much impossible to get your hands on because it's so damn expensive, but it's very clear, has really great harmonics. One of my favorite voicings on this amp. And then of course, Top Boost. As you can imagine, this is our Vox style amp. Very bright and aggressive, and when you clean it up a little bit, it's sort of a chimey clean tone as well. Famously used by the Stones, the Beatles, you get it. Now, of course, I have to talk about the channel selector switch. Now, there's so many different things we can do with this. Let's say we want a more cleaner sound on our channel 1 and then a dirtier sound on our channel 2. Now, we can set that up however we like it, and then we can use the foot switch to switch back and forth. Now, what you can also do with it is share the amp with someone. You can put this in the middle, both will be lit up. The other guitar player can plug in, dial his sound using a different voicing, different EQ, stuff like that. You could have a cleaner sound, he could have a more overdriven sound, or vice versa, but you can definitely change the tone and sound of each channel. But the reverb and tremolo controls will be the same for both channels, so just dial that in properly. Now here is our foot switch. You can see we have 3 different options here, and the coolest part is that we can choose what we want each foot switch to control. So if we want to control switching channels, or the boost, limiter, tremolo, reverb, or even the effects loop, you can turn that on and off, which is an insanely great feature. You can make this one for the effects loop, this one for the reverb, this one for the channel, and you can mash all you want. And taking a look at the back of the amp, this is obviously where we plug her in. Now another cool feature is that there's a locking mechanism to this. So once you hold it down, plug it in, let go, it will lock in there. You can't accidentally pull it out while you're playing, so another cool feature. Right here we have speaker outputs. The Mach 3 provides you up to 200 watts at either 8 or 4 ohms as determined by the speaker volume. Now that's another really great feature. I mean, they say it's a combo amp, but you can take this and remove this and use it as a head and use whatever speakers you would like. Now the Mach 3 combo cabinet, it's a 250 watt Celestion copper back speaker, which is plugged into the 8 ohm jack. Like I said, you can use whatever speaker cabinets you have available if you do not want to use this one, but this one sounds great too. Now here's our line out. This is what I was talking about earlier. You would have an XLR going into this, and then that would go into your interface, that would go into front of house, whatever you want to use it for. This is where the silent recording comes in, the silent playing. Here's our effects loop, our return and send. You know how that goes. This right here is where our foot switch goes. This is our headphone jack. If you need to play quietly, just plug in your headphones. And then this right here is our cab simulation switch. Now the signal out is processed through their internal cabinet simulation circuit. That basically like warms up the tone to simulate the effect of a typical guitar speaker. Now the one all the way to the left is FRFR. That sends the full range unprocessed sound of the amp to use with external cab sim models. So let's say front of house has a cab sim model that you'd rather use, you would turn this on. Basically what this means is that it's off. It's not running through any speaker. Now the middle position is our normal position. This will sound like the typical 12-inch guitar speaker, and it's recommended if you're using headphones or running through a PA. And then all the way to the right is our bright position. This selects a chirpy singing tone, typical of like a vintage 10-inch speaker. So tons of options on the back of this amp as well. Now I'll soon get into who I think this amp is for, but first I need to talk about my favorite feature. The first being the separate mix out volume controls. Now this allows you to maintain a consistent signal out level while adjusting your speaker volume on stage. This was actually insanely helpful in a situation I was in at a gig a few weeks ago. I couldn't hear my guitar through the floor monitors. I even had in-ears. I couldn't hear anything through them either. Something went wrong. But luckily enough, I could just adjust the amp volume on the stage so I could hear it. But what the problem could have been is that most venues will just mic up your amp. And whatever volume your amp is on is the volume that it's gonna go through the in-house speakers and even your floor monitors. If I couldn't hear anything and I adjusted the volume on the amp, everything would have just been overly loud. I would have messed up the live mix. It just could have been a mess. Whereas now the in-house volume will stay where it is, since the XLR is going from the back of this amp into in-house. And then there's two level controls, the signal out, which is the in-house, which I will not touch, and then the normal amp volume, which is something that I can adjust and I can basically use it as my floor monitor. Now I've run into similar issues before when I was using my tube amp where they just mic'd up the speaker cab, and if I couldn't hear myself, I hate to do it, but you have to adjust the volume on stage, but that also messes up the overall mix in-house and things like that. So I don't have to run into that issue anymore. Now, other benefits of this, like I said, that you can go straight through PA systems without hearing anything coming out of this amp. And with that being said, you can practice super quietly because you can plug this directly into your interface going through your DAW. You can record directly through and just hear it through your monitors. You don't have to mic anything up. You can do it super late at night. You can do it if you're in a small apartment. It's great, and that is why it is my favorite feature. So now, who do I think this amp is for? This amp is one of the most versatile amps I've ever played. Like I said, you can use it for quiet practicing and recording using all of its different tonal voicings, or you could even bring it on the road with you and use its 200 watts of tube-like power and just melt the faces of those listening. If you're a gigging musician or a home studio rock star looking for a lightweight amp that has built-in reverb, tremolo, comes with a foot switch, has 2 channels, a cab sim switch, effects loop, and a ton more, then this is 100% for you. It's kind of a no-brainer when it checks all of the boxes of what you need and look for in an amp, especially in today's modern gigging world. Now, if you're someone who does not need all that, maybe just like reverb and tremolo, and you just want clean tones, and you also want a real tube amp, then maybe getting a Fender amp that costs basically around the same as this, that might be just as good for you. But like I said, the Aviator Mach 3, you just have a wider range of tonal options to choose from. You still get the tremolo, you still get the reverb, you still get the foot switch, and you never know what you're gonna need later on down the road, so that's why I think this might be a little bit better of an option. Because you still get those clean tones, it's loud enough, so if that's the sort of situation you're in, then this might be the better option. Now, I'm not saying it's any better than a tube amp. Tube amps are kind of their own thing. Honestly, it's not that practical for me to use that much anymore because it's really loud. It's kind of a pain in the ass to bring to gigs sometimes because it's a head and a combo. Now, don't get me wrong, it sounds great and I love when I can use it and crank it, but when it comes to recording, I can't do it in my apartment. I would have to do it at lower volumes, but I won't get the true tube power and sounds that I want out of it. And it was my main amp, and it's the Sheriff 22 from Victory Amps. I personally just love those Marshall Plexi style tones, but now I also get it with this amp. The Aviator Mach 3 has just slowly taken my tube amp's place, and I'm not saying because it sounds better, maybe I will make a comparison video. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see that. But it's just a lot easier to use. I have a ton more sounds and features, easier to record, easy to practice with, and in today's age, that's something that a lot of people really look for in an amp. Now, if you're someone who has the space for loud tube amps, be my guest, 100% go for it. I probably would too. Now, in a perfect world, I'd gig with both, and I actually do that sometimes. I run both in stereo at lower volumes because it just sounds so great. So even if you do have a bunch of boutique tube amps, adding this into your amp collection may not be a bad idea. For gigging, quiet practicing, maybe even traveling, it just has a lot more practical uses and it sounds great. Let me know what your thoughts are on this amp down in the comments below. Make sure to check out other videos I've done like this on my channel and subscribe to see when I post other gear demos and other guitar related content. Thanks as always for watching, and I will see you in the next video.